Okay, so welcome back again. In this following two sessions, we'll be focusing on the crisis committees. And firstly, dear Onat will explain how to survive in a crisis committee as a first-timer. Let me read his biography. Born in 1998, Onat fell in love with MUN while studying at Top Etu. He participated more than 20 conferences while saying his greatest regret is never attend an MUN conference in high school. After two GA committees, he adapted himself to crisis committees, especially historical and joint crisis committees. He graduated from Top Etu University as a nanotechnology engineer. So, stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So, as Azra also stated, my name is Onat and I graduated from Top Etu University as a nanotechnology engineer. And without further ado, I'll come to the topic. Today, we'll be focusing on how to survive in a crisis committee as a first-timer. So, not to be confused, you are not a first-timer to MUN, you're a first-timer to a crisis committee. So, let's get that on the way. And my voice is coming, I guess. Okay. So, I prepared a little bit of PowerPoint slides, so I'll just share it with you. I think that everybody is seeing it.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go on then. So, how to survive crisis committees as a first-timer. As I also want to state, I enjoy chaos and feed from crisis because in MUN, I think that the real deal is in crisis committees, historical, JCCs, or regular ones that goes on today's world. So, let's continue. First of all, how can you actually get into a crisis committee? You need to follow some further steps. So actually, first of all, learn what is MUN. First of all, learn and research about MUN and what are you going to do in MUN when you join a conference. And then join an MUN as a delegate, but actually do it first in a GA committee so that you can understand the basic procedures of the conferences and actually know the types of people and the types of moderators in a conference. Thirdly, participate in the session because it's like usually 3 days, 1.5 hours for a session, and you'll be extremely bored and just waste your time if you do not participate in the session. Fourth, understand the basics of MUN in a GA committees. This is the crucial part. When you get into a crisis committee, it will just, hell breaks loose. Everything just happens so quickly and you don't know what is going on if you do not know the basics of MUN when you get into a crisis committee. 5, prepare yourself mentally. This is optional. If you do not want to be mental, then just go nuts. And then finally, apply to a crisis committee. I prefer historical or JCCs, but you can go into militaristic NATOs or regular crisis committees that they do usually in every conference. So before we continue, let's learn that what is a crisis committee. A crisis committee is basically like a GA committee or like a regular committee where people get into a room and then discuss their opinions upon a topic. But the different thing is, usually in a crisis committee, the people in the room are on the same side and trying to find a solution for the common good of all the people in the committee. Because in GA committees, usually you have one country for every nation and usually all the people trying to do what's good for their country. So this is the basic of the crisis committees. How do you survive in a crisis committee as a first-timer? It is totally something different. When you get into a crisis committee, everything is different. Everybody's speaking more aggressively. The chair usually participates, and it is actually the most fun part. The topic of the subject all the time changes, and it is not stable. In GA committees, there's a topic, and you try to find a solution. But in crisis committees, the topic can evolve into something much more worse, dangerous and monstrous, or you can actually start to solve it in the days and sessions when they're passing. So, what are the tips to survive in a crisis committee as a first-timer? Never be afraid of talking because you are all usually high school students or university students. And if you're not graduated from political sciences and that kind of stuff, then you're not an actual politician. So nobody can actually criticize you or actually, I don't know, make you look bad if you're not of course, following the procedures of MUN. But besides that, nobody can make you look bad when you say something. So talk all the time, because in crisis committees, people are much more aggressive than you think. I remember that in one time I was in Bilkent University's MUN in 2018, and I met Tecer, legendary chair, and you can actually see him in this picture. And if you're a good delegate, you can see him in MUNs. I said something, we were discussing about this Greek and Turkish Cyprus issue. I said something and he got angry and he threw the Constitution of Turkish Republic to me, the book. So usually it gets kind of aggressive in these kind of committees. So don't be afraid of talking, but talk good. Believe in yourself. If you think that Manchester, as I've said, is the capital of England, believe it and say it. If you can prove it and no other person can say anything against it, or you convince them that it is the truth, so you can actually make the committee go in that direction that you want to. Everything in crisis committees is about believing in yourself and doing what you set your mind to. If you're in a JCC, do not forget that all the people in the room, it is your cabinet, is the same side with you. You're like teammates. Usually not usually, sometimes, much rarely, in some conferences, the USGs or the academia gives some delegates a directive or a direction that they need to go. Usually, maybe sometimes they betray to their cabinet or they do something different. I'm not really a fan of it, and I have never seen it actually. And as a USG, I've never done it, but 90% of the time, you're teammates. So do not forget that it is not GA. You're working in order to solve the same thing. Focus on that. Focus with other people. Do not try to oppose everything your other delegates or other people in the room says. And I think that the most important thing in a crisis committee is that do not be award-oriented. Be goal-oriented. There is a thing that a friend of mine, an MEM friend of mine, told me that usually Pakistani delegates, they come and they tell me that when they get an award, like a Best Delegate Award in a conference, usually in MUN Turkey, MUN Turkey, they get a scholarship. You know, there's some stuff like that. But as far as I know, for Turkish students, there's nothing like that. I haven't seen it. I got a Best Delegate Award, but I haven't seen it. So don't be goal-oriented. It only makes you feel bad, feel frustrated in a conference, and especially in a crisis committee, and you're a first-timer, you don't know what's going around. The crisis is always getting bigger. Always their updates are coming. You don't know what's going on, and you want to get an award. Don't think about that. Be yourself. If you made your research good and you're well prepared, everything will just act out fine. So there are some do nots for crisis committees, and let's start about it. So if you're in a JCC, do not oppose the chair. As I've said, they might, you know, throw something at you, and it is not nice. Then if you're friends, you make a friendly chat with them in the coffee break, but then they say that they're the chair, and you know, there's nothing you can do. So do not oppose with the chair. They can yell at you. So this is something new too. In crisis committees, if the chair is participant or not, for the procedures, he can or she can yell at you, at the delegate. This is not something you usually see in GA committees, but in crisis committees, since the nerves are so tense, the chair or the moderator or the president of the cabinet or the committee can actually yell at you, can talk really aggressively at you. And if you think that this is not for you, then think again while you are getting into crisis committees. I myself had a little bit trouble in my first crisis committee, in my second MUN. Do not solve it like that. Again, do not join a NATO committee without any knowledge about NATO, because it is just ridiculous. NATO, I just wanted to you know, say something about it. NATO is usually not a crisis committee, but it can be a crisis committee in certain conditions. NATO and usually all the crisis committees has a unique procedure of their own. JCCs have a procedure of their own. The Roman Senate has a procedure of its own. The Greek Senate has a procedure of its own. Turkish Senate has a procedure of its own, and NATO. So think it, you know, as I said, NATO, think all of these. They all have a procedure. It is not like GA. It is not like anything else in MUN conferences. So when you get into a crisis committee, when you apply to one and you don't know how it is going to act out, actually make your research. If you're going to an actual committee that exists today and you know the rules, research about it. It is so easy. You just write to Google procedures of NATO, then you learn it. In 2017 in YİİT and MUN, we had a really big problem because, well, the academia made a great job actually. They placed really good delegates, but the thing is, those really good delegates didn't know nothing about NATO procedure. They didn't know about the consensus. They didn't even know about that NATO is actually militaristic pact, and all the people in the room, all the delegates are working for the same thing. So make your research, because in crisis committee, if you do not make your research, it is actually, you're really, you will be seen a bit kind of bad, more than GA committees. Let's continue. Do not go to a conference if you're just going to sit there. Make your research. If you're going to sit there, as I've said, it is 3 days, and in crisis committees, people are coming and going out. The academia is sending some directives. You are writing directives. Learn how to write directives. There are different kind of directives. I'm not going to get into that. It's not a lesson. But learn, research about it. I can actually make you, teach them to you, but it's not going to stay in your mind. So I didn't get into that a lot in this presentation. What I'm just trying to tell to you is that make your research always. If you're going to a committee which is about the issue in Balkans between Montenegro and Serbia, then search about it. At least look at one point of that subject and then you can say something about it. If you're going to a committee, which is the Balkan Wars Joint Crisis Committee, which is by far the best joint crisis committee that I have ever been in 2017, BITKENT model of the United Nations. There were 3 cabinets. All the time something was happening. 10 minutes we were into the conference, directive came from the outside. It said that Croatia declared war on Serbia, and I was in the Serbian cabinet. It was really intense. The atmosphere is really intense for a first-timer to a JCC or a crisis committee. So, knowing the subject and you being able to speak is going to help you a lot. And as I said, every crisis committee is unique. Do not think that a crisis committee is like GA. Even the acts of moderators and the academia against the delegates in crisis committees is different. You are in something too intense. If you ask me, of course, MUN has broad things. It has a lot of aspects in it. There are GA committees. There are a lot of other committees, but I think that in MUN, you need to prepare yourself good enough in order for you to join a crisis committee, because it is where the real fun is. It is more realistic for the real world aspects of United Nations and those kind of committees. And most importantly, you have fun in there. And that is the most important thing in MUN, having fun and learning something. So, as I said, at the end of the day, make sure that in the crisis committee, you're a first timer or not, you're writing directives or you know what to do or not, have fun and learn something. The biggest difference in a crisis committee, as I've said, that the topic does not stay same. Let's say that your topic is how to solve the crisis in Cyprus, the issue in Cyprus. Usually in a GA committee, even if it is a UNSC is not usually seen as a GA committee, but in a UNSC, you cannot find a solution to it. But in a crisis committee, if it's a JCC or a crisis committee, the problem is, yes, find a solution to the Cyprus issue, but it never stays like that. A cabinet, usually there are 2 cabinets in that matter. There's Greece and Turkish cabinet. And every cabinet tried to do something. They attack something. You have the opportunity to attack somewhere, to capture somewhere, to place something or someone to somewhere, or write a press release that says that you are thinking, as the cabinet, you're thinking like that. Or in a crisis committee, you do that same things too, but the answer coming from the secretariat and the academia usually, and you need to act according to it. It changes. It never stays the same. If you understand that these basics, that crisis committees are a living thing at MUN that changes during time, then you're going to be really relaxed and really you're going to enjoy the crisis committees as a first timer. I remember my first time. It wasn't really easy. It was actually really tough. I didn't understand anything for 20 minutes. Everybody was talking. There was something called a semi-moderated caucus. I had no idea what it was about. Just make your research, have fun, and speak. That is the most important thing. As you see in the pictures, drink coffee, it opens your mind, be a good participant, learn something, and do not forget to have fun. That is the only things that I can say to you. That would be the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I know that I didn't get into the details of committees. I can answer them. I think that we still have time. So yeah, if you have questions, I can take questions. Now I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, there's a question on the chat box. How often do you commit war crimes?
I think that, so I don't actually understand the question. How often do you commit war crimes? So let's say that you're in a World War II committee, and then there's the Nazi side and the USSR side. So a war crime is like the cabinet is thinking about using chemical weapons. If the cabinet is in really bad terms, like that Russians came to Berlin in the committee, then you may think about it and do it. But try to be realistic in crisis committees, because if you be too funny, the chair will not be actually looking so good to you, and the other delegates also will not be looking good to you. Be strict. Of course, if you need to do that in a war cabinet, you need to do that. I never did that. I've seen, we discussed it in one conference, but I don't remember. But, you know, it is not too often. So any other question? Could the speaker please elaborate on the directives? I can. There are different type of directives. I'm not going to say all of them, but the directive is that you, as it says in the word, you direct something to happen. Let's say that you're in a cabinet in the economical war between China and USA, which I had done 2 years ago. Let's say that you're the Minister of Economy of USA. So you need to learn what is the GDP of USA, and let's say that you need to learn something about the broke ratios in order to continue in your cabinet. You write a personal directive that you want to learn. There are ways to write it. You can look up to them over the internet. You want to learn the GDP of USA, or you want to learn the index of some company in the stock market. So you write something like that, you sign it, and then you submit it to your chair. If the chair finds it suitable, he submits it to the academia, then the academia sends you back the answer so that you can inform your committee. It works like that. There are war directives, there are joint directives. Some directive needs to be joint, that whole committee needs to accept it. It is like that, but most you need to search for it over the internet because it's really long, and I don't think that we have time for that much. So it is a long one. I have a question about choosing the delegates from crisis, since there are sometimes some volunteers to be in crisis, but it's sometimes compulsory for delegates. How can we deal with this necessity? How can we encourage them to join or survive during the sessions in JMUN? So I think that the delegates should be chosen from experienced ones, because how good a delegate is in a GA committee, then they can do something in a crisis committee. Because you need to know the basics of MUN if you're going to join to a crisis committee. If you're like that, if you're that kind of a delegate, if you are disciplined, if you know how MUN procedure works, then you can survive in crisis committees, and because you can understand what is going on in 10 minutes maybe. So how can you encourage them? I don't think that there is a way to do that. If a person wants that, they go, and if they don't want that, they don't. But I mean, I can say that crisis committees are definitely much more fun than anything else in MUN for me. There are people who may oppose me, but so I don't know if that answered your question or not. May I continue, by the way, with the questions?
One more question.
One more question, okay. How do the crisis committees differ from UNSC? It is a good question, actually. So a crisis committee, UNSC is a common body of United Nations. It is the United Nations Security Council. So the procedure of it and the work ethics of United Nations Security Council is set. You can look up to it. The nations are set. The things that can happen and the solutions that the committee can find are set. There are certain things that they can do. But in a crisis committee, the selections are much more broad. If you think in a nice logic and actually find something suitable to the situation that is going on, you can literally do anything, but it needs to be suitable. So I think that this is the biggest difference between UNSC and crisis committee. Azra, can I answer the question from Mr. Onat also, and then I can finish?
Yes, and also there's one more good question about chairs.
Okay, if we can, I will. Should the first timer prefer attending joint cabinet crisis or crisis committees? If the first timer is a first timer to MUN, he or she must join to a crisis or a joint crisis committee. But if he attended or she attended to 3 or 4 MUNs in GA committees or other ones, they can attend to crisis or joint crisis committees. But I think that there are no differences. There are differences, but for a delegate, if he or she wants to join to a joint crisis committee, they can do that, or to a crisis committee, they can do that. There are, of course, certain procedural differences, but in order of hardness, I don't think that there is, they can do that. They can do both. What is the good question, by the way? What is the biggest mistake made by chairs and or head of crisis? How can conferences avoid it? This is going to be the last question because we don't have, unfortunately. The biggest mistake, if you ask me, chairs do is that there are actually a couple of. First, the chairs sometimes may be too aggressive, and it is really bad for the psychology of delegates. Usually in Turkey, the delegates are high school students, so they may be fragile, they may take it personal. So the chair must be really optimistic, but firm in some situations. The first biggest thing is that. Second, usually it happens in joint crisis committees. The chair participates a lot. Okay, so the chair is a participant chair, but the job must be done by delegates. So we have to keep that in mind if you're chair of a crisis committee or a joint crisis committee. Do not, interfere with the delegates' work a lot. You may guide them, but do not do all the work. But I think that the biggest problem, especially with head of crisis and chairs, is that miscommunication, especially in joint crisis committees and crisis committees. These 2 cabinets in joint crisis committees, or 3 cabinets, I don't know the number. If it's a crisis committee, the chair of the crisis committee and the head of crisis should be communicating all the time. Because if one committee is doing something or one cabinet is doing something and the other one is doing something completely opposite of that and completely just really different than that, and if the head of crisis do not know that or do not say anything about it, then it will just make the procedure go too long. And at some point, the things will just collide to each other. It will be something like, as Cem Karaca said, Arap saçı, and it will be really, really hard to solve. Miscommunication is the biggest problem in crisis committees and joint crisis committees. The conferences can avoid it by just simply saying to the head of crisis to follow everything that is going on in committees. So I think that this is all the time we have, right?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation and your answers.
Thank you.
So hope to see you in the next session.
Yeah, I hope too. Goodbye to everybody. Thank you for coming. Yay, bye.